Hello and welcome to Found, TechCrunch's podcast, where we bring you the stories behind the startups. This week, we're changing it up and bringing you along with us to TechCrunch Disrupt. I'm Becca Skutak, and you're about to hear a conversation I had with Dan Lorenc, the co-founder and CEO of cybersecurity company Chainguard. This interview goes deeper into topics I touched on in our onstage panel with one of Chainguard's most notable investors, the Chainsmokers. If you want to hear that full conversation, we'll link to it in our description. I hope you enjoy this bonus conversation. So you may all know the Chainsmokers, maybe from some of their music, hits like Closer featuring Halsey, or Something Just Like This featuring Coldplay, or maybe it's their residency in Las Vegas. But today, we're not going to talk about any of that. We are going to talk about something much more interesting, investing in B2B startups. But one thing we talked about as we were prepping for this call is that usually when you think of celebrity investors, you think of consumer startups and sort of that celebrity investor being that person that helps that consumer startup get into the right rooms and meet the right people. And we were talking a little bit about with this strategy and you guys investing in this side of the house, the B2B side, it's almost an opposite dynamic. Your startup founders are kind of helping you guys get into the space because you are more of an outsider in this category. So Dan, we're actually going to start with you. Why don't you tell us a little bit about the first time you interacted with the Chainsmokers and kind of what that whole scenario looked like?
Yeah, so it was April Fool's Day a few years ago, and I checked my phone and I got this email that said it was from Alex from the Chainsmokers and that he runs a venture fund.
That's not my email, by the way.
It's like Chainsmokers Official or something.
Yeah.
That is the one you joined me. But yeah, I read this. We were putting around together at the time, and we were trying to figure out the final allocations. And it was like, what are the odds that he would possibly email me on the right day when we can actually take money like this? And it happens to be April Fool's Day. This feels like a joke, but I've got to respond. So I replied, and we got on a call the next day or something like that. And it wasn't a joke. It was real. Yeah, and I did ask you later how you happened to know that was the exact right time, and you told me you had spies everywhere or something like that.
Yeah.
Why don't we start by talking a little bit about Chainguard and tell us a little bit about your company?
Sure. The company's called Chainguard. We're about 3 years old now, and we're in the software supply chain security space. Open source software is about 90% of all the code people use before they start writing their code at their companies. They're building on this massive foundation of software that other people have written and given away for free and share it on the internet. And that's awesome because it means you don't have to write all that stuff over and over again yourself, and you can just reuse this code that other people have worked on and contributed to. Most cybersecurity people focus on that 10% of code that you're writing inside of your company and kind of ignoring that other shared code base that you're pulling in. We're trying to provide a safe source for all of that open source that your developers are building on to make it easier, safer, and more productive for them to build their applications on top.
So why are so many other companies focused on that smaller piece of the market than what you guys are doing? Because it seems like obviously the bigger opportunity is where you guys are focused.
Probably a couple of reasons. One is it's the easiest to address. It's your code, you wrote it, you can fix it. It's also more likely to look like your fault if something goes wrong in that code. That's code that you wrote. There's kind of this conception that if somebody else wrote it and it was on the internet, then it was safe for you to use. But that's not really true. If you incorporate that code into your product, just because it was free doesn't mean you're not responsible for that code anymore. Open source is really rising too, that 90% number. Like that's within the last 10 years that it's really gotten to that level of ubiquity. It's been around for decades and decades and decades, but it's really reached that level of ubiquity inside sensitive environments, critical infrastructure, a lot more recently. So it's kind of a new space. Attackers are also starting to notice it and take advantage of it too, which security is kind of, unfortunately, this cat and mouse game where even if you know something's a problem, you have other stuff to go solve until attackers really start to push on something. And that's when the industry moves and starts to actually try to protect it. So in some ways, it's a good thing. It means we've gotten good enough at securing all of the other areas of infrastructure, right? People aren't reusing passwords. There's two-factor auth to prevent phishing, that kind of thing. So now the next easiest way in for attackers is to go target these open source projects and try to get malware into companies that way.
No, that's so interesting to think about because I feel like open source is like what everyone's talking about now. And that's like the word of the last few years, open source this, open source that. Do you feel there's competition in this space? There's some of those cybersecurity players who were focused not on this area getting into this space. Like, how has the competition in this area changed even since you guys just got started?
It's still really new. There's a lot of folks in the supply chain security area, but there's not really anyone doing what we're doing yet. that's not going to last forever. But it's a crowded kind of category, but not a very crowded product area, I would say.
And what is it like building a company that is on the defensive? Because so many companies, they want to go out, they want to sell you because they want you to change and do this and do differently. But you're trying to sell people on protecting themselves against something that maybe hasn't even happened to them yet. How do you build a defensive company and how do you pitch it to different customers?
Yeah, it's about selling the value proposition. People know this is a big problem they have to take care of. And because there's not a lot of competition yet, it's got to build versus buy. And we're selling the trust, we're selling our expertise, and we're selling the fact that we can do a really, really good job at this and better than anybody should be able to do in-house.
Taking a step back here, what got you interested in this space to begin with?
Yeah, I've been doing this for a very long time, since before we started this company. I worked at Google for about 10 years before we got started. And Google has amazing technical infrastructure, but a lot of it only works in Google's kind of homegrown monolithic environment designed for Google. And then watching public cloud kind of blow up and take off in the last 7 or 8 years, a lot of that stuff Google had built stopped working, and it couldn't really handle the way open source was used by Google's customers, especially as Google had to start building products the same way their customers did as part of Google Cloud Platform. And so it was just incredibly terrifying that all of the security protections that we had built for Google's kind of internal stuff just didn't work anymore in this container and Kubernetes and public cloud world. The attack on SolarWinds kind of at the end of 2021 really put all of this into perspective. It was kind of the first major software supply chain attack. It hit the US government. It hit everyone that was kind of using SolarWinds products. There was an executive order from the Biden administration around this after a whole bunch of new standards and everything rolled out. So it seemed like a good time to start a company in the space.
So you guys got started after the SolarWinds thing.
Yeah.
So I was going to ask you about timing, but it sounds like that's how you kind of knew. But how did you gain conviction to sort of make the plunge as opposed to trying to be like an entrepreneur and trying to build at Google or sort of improve what they were doing?
Yeah, I'm really happy at Google. We were having a great time. But my co-founder, Matt, our CTO, left and took some time off during the pandemic, and he was just doing barbecue. He bought one of those big green egg smokers and was just learning how to do brisket. And I kept trying to get him to come back to Google because it was important and stuff we'd been working on was getting a bunch of attention. But he just kept sending me pictures of brisket. One day he finally said he was ready to come back to work, but how about we quit and do a startup instead? And I was like, oh, that does sound like a good idea. Talked to Kim, other co-founder, and we basically put in notice immediately and left and figured out how to fundraise and build a company after that.
And I'm always curious about what that's like because, of course, of all the companies to work for, Google's relatively stable. It's a pretty stable place to work. You mentioned you had been there for years. What was it like making that decision to take the plunge, betting on yourself and taking a bet on this idea?
I didn't think about it too much. That probably would have made it harder.
Right.
But yeah, it turned out that the end of 2021 was the easiest time in history to raise venture capital. So it was a lot easier to get started than we thought it was going to be.
Right.
That changed pretty quickly the year after that. But yeah, it was a great time to start a company.
More from this conversation right after a quick break. And thinking about having the idea that you guys did, launching the company, how did you build it into what it is today? Are you going off of your first ideas? Have you had to change or pivot a lot? What were the building blocks like actually getting to where you are now?
Yeah, I kind of like how we did it. We didn't go in with a product idea or anything like that. We went in with the problem area that we knew was important and we knew it was going to be hard to solve. And we knew we had spent a long time thinking about it, so we would have a good shot. But we tried a bunch of different things at first. We tried a bunch of different product ideas. We really built out 2 products when we started the company and tried selling them both. We kind of got pulled the wrong direction originally. One of the products we got a couple early deals on and kind of fizzled out. But we kept working on both of them at the same time. And eventually the second product is the one that we're selling a lot of now, our Chainguard images product. That one just sort of started to blow up at the end of 2022, and we made a decision just to shut down the first one and focus there.
Yeah, that's so interesting because people always talk about focus and how a very easy pitfall for early startups is to try to do too much at once and too many revenue streams and too many things. And so you guys were able to surpass that. How do you think about that? And if you were to start the company again, do you think you would try a 2-prong approach, or are you like, that wasn't our best idea?
I think it was a good idea to try a bunch of different things. And like you talk about being agile, iterating, listening to customer feedback. But with enterprise sales and very slow sales cycles, it's really hard to do that quickly. It takes a long time to figure out if people are interested in it. It takes even longer to figure out if they're willing to buy it. Doing a couple things at once lets you maximize the iteration cycles you have in that fixed amount of time. In a different space, a different buying cycle, a different buyer, then no, I probably wouldn't do something like that again.
Yeah. And speaking of that, what has it been like selling this product? When you talked about the problem earlier, of course, it seems like a huge problem companies would want to buy, but you also mentioned it's a new space. Companies probably haven't been thinking necessarily that they need cybersecurity in this area. So what has it been like selling this to potential customers?
Yeah, it's a pretty interesting sales cycle and sales process because the whole area of supply chain security sits between security and development teams, which is why it's traditionally been hard to solve. Security knows it's a problem, but they're not the ones responsible for fixing it. Development teams are.
Right.
And so it's kind of bridging those two together. We talk to CISOs, we talk to security teams. They always love it, but they can't implement it. They can't roll it out. It's not their budget at the end of the day. And so we kind of sell it. We make the developers' lives easier. We save them time. We let them do things faster. We let them do things the way they want to do. And it makes security happy at the end of the day.
Yeah. I know from chatting with enterprise VCs over the last couple of years, even as sales have gone slower because of market conditions, the economy, et cetera, one of the areas that VCs were saying was consistently their portfolio companies are performing the best were cybersecurity. Do you guys feel like you're able to tap into that wave of companies being like, we're pulling back on our spending, but we know this is super important? Or did you feel any kind of that crunch in the last couple of years when sales were down?
There was a little bit, definitely in 2022 there when everyone was panicking, the economy was crashing, the venture market was over, layoffs were happening everywhere. It definitely slowed deals down when you go in, do a whole POC, and then the team's gone the next day because they all got laid off. But really, we're selling value, we're selling ROI, we're selling time savings, we're selling efficiencies. We package that up in ways CFOs understand, and they know that they're going to save money by doing it this way, and we're able to get deals done.
And thinking about company building during that kind of a market too, because like you mentioned, you started 2021, very easy time to raise venture capital, a lot of momentum in the market, and then that momentum literally disappeared overnight. And you guys would have still been very early at that time. Like, what has it been like building a startup in probably some of the most tumultuous years we've had in the venture market in the last decade?
Yeah, we got very, very lucky fundraising-wise. When we did our Series A, the round we first met MANTIS and the Chainsmokers during, one of our seed investor called and said, hey, things look like they might get bad. You should probably try to raise money soon. And I happened to have a dinner booked with our investors from Sequoia the next night. They were in town visiting, and I was like, all right, I'll try to do it tomorrow then. They were in town. And we shook hands the very next morning, and then by the time the round closed, the markets had completely collapsed, and I still remember them telling me at closing that they would not have done that again today, and we got very lucky timing-wise.
Oh, that's so interesting. Because I know sometimes you'll talk to people, and they'll be like, it wasn't luck. Like, everything about us was so perfect, and like, we never had issues. And it's nice to hear you be like, no, I mean, of course there's luck. There's always luck. So it's good to hear that you guys were kind of able to like see the writing on the wall, because I know so many companies didn't have that mindset at all. But speaking on the fundraising piece, knowing you guys worked with Sequoia super early, what was it like pitching this to begin with? I know venture funding was hot, but it's a newer category. Like, did you find some people didn't get it? Was there an educational element? What was it like getting VCs on board in the beginning?
In the beginning, it was enough to just say you were quitting a job at Google and we're going to start a company.
Amazing.
It was very easy. At some point, though, it transitions and you have to have a real business with revenue and metrics and everything like that people are investing in. And that's how it works now. You know, we build relationships with investors. They track how the business is going. And when we're ready to fundraise, we tell them and we go get a deal done.
And I want to talk about working with MANTIS a little bit, because we just, of course, were on stage with them. Knowing you got that cold email on April Fool's, what actually gave you the conviction to respond? Or maybe you didn't have conviction. Maybe you were like, maybe this is spam. Like, what got you to actually reply?
They kind of glossed over this in the panel, but Alex is pretty legendary at those cold emails. They talked about it a bit.
Alex would go into the back end of Hype Machine, look at all like the blogs they scrape music from, send, I kid you not, like 500. Every time we do, I'd be remixing a song every week. I'd give it to him. He'd send 500 personalized emails, because what he realized is, you know, all these kids were getting these blanket, boring promotional emails from record labels that, you know, and these were just kids that wanted to be closer to music and artists and all this stuff. So he would find out that kid went to go to Syracuse and be like, dude, it fucking sucks. You're in Syracuse. It's in January and your football team still sucks. And like, you know, within like 1 year, I went to Syracuse, so I can say that. Yeah. But within 1 year, you know, like, you know, we had gone from like nobody in the music scene to, you know, like this relevant, cool thing that was happening on blogs. And I feel like that approach has transformed throughout our music career. That's now kind of come into where we're at in investing, is like, let's just get in there. Let's make sure we're adding value. Let's bring this like level of inclusivity and fun.
He spent years sending 500 of them a month to different people. And there's just something about his stream of thought. Like, it's incredibly authentic. You can tell a real person wrote this. It's not like AI generated BDR spam that you get. You can tell that he's a real person. You can tell he cares, and you want to meet him. And he's incredibly good at this. And he does it all the time, and it works. But something in there just made me want to respond. But that's what he does, and he's so good at it. They call them legendary Alex Pall cold emails, and they're legendary for a reason.
That's like, of all the things to be legendary for, cold emails. I send a lot of cold emails. I wish I had that title.
You should read some of his and get some tips.
No, I definitely will. But I know we talked about this bit on stage, but I'm curious, what has it been like growing the company alongside someone like that? Because of course, on the one hand, you work with someone like Sequoia already, which is a celebrity in their own right in our space. But Chainsmokers are obviously a little bit different. And I know thinking of how they work with you guys, the parties, the stuff in Vegas, you're not getting that from Andreessen Horowitz.
Right.
So like, how has it been for you guys navigating having an investor like that when it is probably not even just different for the value add and stuff like that, but just very different ball games in general?
Yeah, they've been amazing to work with. And like I talked about on stage, their reputation has come such a long way and it's so deserved. I love seeing them succeed. And just anecdotally, like we've been working with you for about 2 years now, and your reputation, your brand, like you've done a huge amount in 2 years. Like in the beginning, people were kind of skeptical that we were working with you.
Yeah.
Now other investors, other companies reach out to me for intros to you because they want to get to know you and work with you. It's completely flipped.
LinkedIn, I'm telling you, it's all LinkedIn. I'm on LinkedIn.
All right.
When Sequoia found out we were going to let Mantis invest in that round, I remember they were like, really, them? Are you sure? And then they did some digging, and I still remember the response they got. It said they're shockingly value add. And they're like, okay, cool, we'll do this. And now we're having dinner at our board member from Sequoia's house tonight. Like it's come around where like they're begging for intros to Mantis because they see what Mantis can do for the other portfolio companies and what they've seen for us.
That's so interesting because I feel like lead investors, I've never heard of them being so like skeptical of someone else coming into the round. But maybe, well, reputations precede themselves, I guess. But yeah, thinking about where you guys are at now and the money you have raised, what do the next 18 months, like 2 years look like for you guys? Like, where are you headed?
Scaling the business. It works. Scaling it, basically. More sales, building out the team. We do company summits twice a year. We just had our last one in September. The one before that was 6 months prior. I think we were about 80 people. At this one, we were like 200 people. And it was the first moment I had when I looked around and said, I don't even know who any of these people are. And yeah, just staying on top of the growth and continuing to build on what works.
And one question we really like to ask on Found is, looking back at sort of getting the company started, what is one mistake now that you can't believe you made? Or looking back on it, you're like, that was so silly, that was so dumb, that was so naive. Like, what's something you look back on that you can laugh about now, but at the time you were like, oh my God, what am I doing?
I mean, there's tons of those, like with hindsight. Like if we knew the market was going to collapse, we would have done things very differently. But like we didn't know that, and it's hard to prepare for those kind of things. So I don't really look at that so much. I think we should have shut down our one product even earlier instead of giving it another 6 months to see if it was going to work or not. We saw the signals early on, and we just kind of kept going on both. And I think we should have read those signs earlier and leaned even harder into our second product that's working today.
Yeah. And I think a follow-up on that too would be, we don't say this is an advice show for founders, but there's definitely that element baked into it. When did you guys know to kill it off?
When we couldn't keep up with demand on the other product, we literally had to.
That makes sense.
And we should have done that earlier instead of waiting until it got to that point.
Definitely. What has demand been like on your main product, your only product now?
It's been amazing. Yeah, we're scaling. We're finally on top of it, but it's growing faster than any of us really thought. We're basically double our sales target for the year, what we thought we were going to do at the start, and we just keep having to raise it.
Oh, wow. I feel like that's a good place to end it.
Yeah.
But no, thank you so much for coming on this little extra podcast, Dan.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Of course. Found is hosted by myself, TechCrunch senior reporter Becca Skutak, alongside senior reporter Dominic Midori-Davis. Found is produced by Maggie Stamets with editing by Kel. Our illustrator is Bryce Durbin. Found's audience development and social media is managed by Morgan Little, Alyssa Stringer, and Natalie Kreisman. TechCrunch's audio products are managed by Henry Pickavet. Thanks for listening, and we'll be back next week.